Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Hey, Crystal.
Hi, Monica.
I think this week we're going to talk about Ruby Franke.
Yes, the very popular mommy blogger that just recently was in the news not that long ago.
Not that long ago. This is pretty new, and there was a recent 2020 that came out about it, which I thought was very well done. I think there's going to be some better documentaries probably to come out in the future when we have a little more distance from these events. But I think that it's an interesting overall topic and leads us into some of our favorite niches to talk about, like Mormonism. So I think that, it hits a bunch of things for me. So the second I saw this case come out, I had not heard of Ruby Franke before she became infamous. I didn't know about her when she was famous, but I went back and looked at some of her earlier life, and her YouTube channel, 8 Passengers, that she started in 2015.
Yeah, she ended up with over 2 million subscribers in her prime, which is not a small amount.
She made millions of dollars off of this, off of her YouTube channel about her children.
Yeah, it was mainly about family, parenting, religion, and I was shocked with it because Ruby Franke, she was a high school graduate. She doesn't have very extensive education. Her husband is a PhD. He was a former professor at BYU, owned his own business. First, looking at their life and their videos, you would think that he's bringing home all the money. But reality is this mommy blog is bringing in millions of dollars. Basically her putting her life on
millions of dollars. She really achieved something that a lot of young Mormon moms specifically are trying to achieve. There's such a huge push in that church to preach your word and spread your testimony, and they've always been very early technology adapters and using every means at their disposal to try to, I don't know, I guess, what's the word?
Preach.
I guess it's preach. I feel like there's another word I just can't think of. But they want to spread their word as far and as wide. So It's no problem that it's on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. That's all.
I know what word you're trying to think of, and I also can't think of it. And I'm sure
proselytize.
Tell us.
Proselytize.
Yeah, but you're right. And you kind of think of every person, not every person, but right now it's very idealized, to be an influencer or be a vlogger, or these are all things that people are oh my God, it'd be so great to make millions just doing nothing, basically. And to make it to that height and popularity and fame is really difficult, and it's kind of just one in a million. And I gotta say that you're totally right. The Mormonism, there's a lot of Mormon moms that have gone into the light of either influencing or TikTok or YouTube, some for good reasons, some for not so good reasons. And it kind of takes the spreading the word to a different level versus just going out and doing door to door or doing your mission. You can reach a lot more people if you're just posting online.
Yeah, Ruby reached millions of people. Can't take that away from her. She definitely did. She didn't just reach them, they subscribed to her. She was such a popular mommy blogger, and people were taking her advice. People were asking for her advice on how to raise their children because she was showing all of these wonderful examples of how she could put her principles before her kids' needs, how she could put her husband's needs before her kids' needs, how they lean on their church. And, I guess the trick to life is just being an extremely strict parent and documenting it all of the time.
And I think that's part of the idea that makes me nervous is if you look at some of these videos and the pictures that she posts, she has this perfect little family. Her children are well dressed. She lives in this beautiful home. They're getting along. But every once in a while, she would show that, like, there's dysfunction. So she made you feel like she was part of the family. You were part of their community. She would show her kids having issues. She would show her kids being successful. So it kind of presented as very normal and ordinary. And her husband, and her 6 kids, you could relate to, oh, we have that issue. Or, well, I haven't tried that. Maybe I'll try this technique. It felt very comfortable in the early years watching some of these videos.
For sure. And I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, her YouTube channels have been removed. So you can't watch the full episodes and things that she used to post, but I've watched a lot of clips, and it definitely seems in the early years that the kids were doing a lot of smiling and playing and doing family activities, and it was cute and it was very wholesome. And I think it just initially was organic and maybe done with good intentions. And I think once serious money started coming into play, there was this need to keep creating content, which I think the whole idea of family blogging kind of falls apart right there, because now you are purposely looking for times to exploit your kids. And when they're having a bad moment, a good moment, you're filming it and you're publishing it.
Mm-hmm. And I think I saw one clip, which I think is going to become very ironic as we keep talking, is in this video, her family's having a moment of dysfunction. And she blatantly says, do not accept abuse within the family. And I think that it's just so ironic looking at what happens with her, which we're going to get into, but it shows that, like, from an outside, what you're seeing online is not necessarily exactly what's going on. And that's scary to think that, like, someone's idolizing someone whose income is basically finding things going on in her family and exploiting it for money. Like, what's on the internet is there forever. Like, her kids, this is out there forever, whatever she posts. Like,
oh yeah, even more so now, honestly.
yeah. And I think it, like, for me, it started getting icky when her son went to the wilderness camp, her son Chad.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're gonna have to do a whole other episode about just those programs in general. But 100%, yes, definitely.
Because there's so many people now that have gone to these programs that it's all coming out that these are horrible programs. But she sent her son when he was 15, who is her second oldest, to a wilderness camp in Arizona for troubled teens. And I think it's Anasia, or I might be pronouncing that wrong. He went there, he came back, and he pulled a prank on his little brother, which, find me an older brother who doesn't mess with his younger brother. Like, they shared
it wasn't even a big deal. It really wasn't a big deal at all. Yeah. Like, who hasn't been mean to their siblings? It's crazy.
Exactly.
He told them they were going to go to Disney, and they weren't. Like, okay.
And imagine
everyone's done that.
This boy is, like, a good, like, 6 or 7 years younger than him. I don't remember the exact age, but, like, it's not like they were a year apart. Like, you're sharing a bedroom with your, like, elementary school brother. You're a teenager. You're gonna mess with him a little bit. Said he was gonna go to Disney. He was all packed up and ready to go, and then he said he wasn't. That was it. But apparently there's some other things Chad also admitted to, where he, again, was messing with his little brother. He wanted to, like, play basketball, and Chad picked him up and put him on the rim and then left him there for, like, 30 minutes, which is a little mean.
Unsafe.
Unsafe.
It's funny.
Mean.
Yeah, it's funny, but it's unsafe and it's mean.
As a 15-year-old boy, that's funny. I get it. But the one that, like, I could see where the parents would get concerned is he actually pointed a BB gun at his little brother's face, where that, again, now we're crossing the line of, okay, you're not just being a big brother picking on your little brother. Now it's getting into danger. Like, that's that one was not so okay. But
Yes.
her response was to take away his bedroom for 7 months, give, and he slept on the floor or on a beanbag in the living room for 7 months. And that was their form of punishment because he had to show positive behavior for a minimum of 6 months to potentially earn back his bedroom. He did end up getting it back 7 months later. And they posted a video of it when Chad actually brought it up, and you could see her face. I watched the clip. She goes into this quick flash of panic of like, oh, we hadn't told anybody about that yet, but it was one of those live sessions, so like it's cat's out of the bag now. I gotta talk about it.
Right.
And the son's like, you could tell he was taking this opportunity of like, no, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna make a joke out of it, like coping mechanism, but it's getting out there. And I guess she put it up there and then took it down relatively quickly because who wants that out there?
Yeah. That's sort of the problem with abusing your kids and then also filming them, especially live, because you don't really know what they're going to say. And as the kids got older, they started developing more autonomy, which I think she definitely hated. And the older kids were rebelling, which is also understandable because that's normal teenage behavior, but also it's going to be exacerbated by an extremely strict, unfair environment. And it would seem to me that if she was very proud of that punishment of forcing him to sleep on a beanbag for 7 months, she would have maybe made a whole YouTube series about that punishment. But the fact that she was hiding it shows that there's probably a lot of things that are being hidden. And she's showing herself at her best, which is scary to me because I still don't really see that in these later videos. There's more examples.
Yeah, her justification for that one was simply just, well, the camp did it, so it can't be bad.
That's exactly why it's bad. That right there is why it's bad.
Right.
The camp did it is enough.
Therefore, it's fine. And then the other one I think that is just a light into it was her daughter, Eve, who was 6 at the time, forgot her lunch for school.
Oh my God, that broke my heart. Yes. It's so crazy.
How I originally learned about Ruby, because I saw this, I think, on TikTok, and I was like, hold on a minute, no way. And I went down a rabbit hole. So that's how I actually originally found out about Ruby was, for those who don't know, Ruby's 6-year-old daughter went to school without a lunch. And the school called her and was like, hey, Eve doesn't have a lunch. Why don't you like come down and bring her one? And her response was, no, my daughter at 6 is responsible for her own lunch, packing and bringing it to school. She didn't do it, therefore she's going to be hungry, and that's how she's going to learn.
It's the natural consequence. That's what she said.
Kidding me? I could barely remember to tie my shoes, let alone pack my own lunch at 6. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's just an unreasonable expectation. It really is. And like that is a lot of, I mean, it's very Scientology, like treating her like she's not a child and this is just her sole responsibility, which is not how most people look at 6-year-olds. And I'm sure the teacher was horrified, and obviously the viewers were horrified. I mean, there were several examples that were shown on her channel of just the mask totally slipping and her going over the line in terms of what people thought was acceptable punishment. I mean, I saw the one video where she was threatening to behead her kid's toy, and that really got a lot of attention online because it just seemed so mean. And all of these abusive little moments that are sprinkled into her nice mommy blogging started to really raise a lot of concerns for the viewers, and several online petitions got started, some of which got tens of thousands of signatures to basically cancel her channel.
Yeah, and not only cancel, it basically started to pressure CPS to start looking into her. And because of one of those logs, it actually had enforced local CPS to go to her house, do a visit, And unfortunately, they didn't find anything and the case was closed. But I think it's important to think about when you have that kind of publicity and you know that this is coming, it's very easy to fool someone for the
Mm-hmm.
10-20 minute visit that they're in your home. Yes,
Yeah.
they're talking to the kids, but after these kids are conditioned. So, of course, they're gonna be scared, or if nothing's particularly visible, it's very easy for CPS to go into a home, not find anything on their first visit, and leave. And that's exactly what happened. They went once, as far as I know, didn't see anything, and left.
Yeah. They actually went several times. There was multiple welfare checks that had been made to the house, but most of the time police were not allowed access into the home
Mm-hmm.
and a warrant was requested and denied. So they were not able to demand entry into the home. But
Right.
there wasn't like a formal investigation. And I mean, it's also interesting to note that some of the welfare calls had been made by the oldest child in the Franke family who had already moved out. Sherry, she was at BYU away at
Mm-hmm.
college and had cut ties with her parents, but was still trying to be involved with her siblings and would get updated from the neighbors about different alarming things going on, like the four youngest children being left alone for days at a time. And she's being told this by neighbors and she's calling the police multiple times and they're going out to do welfare checks, mostly being just turned away. Everything's
Yeah.
fine, everything's fine. And I feel like when you it's some of it's just appearances and the it's almost like, well, they're so wealthy. Like, look at this big house, look at this nice life that they have. You know, there's food in the fridge, the kids are well dressed, everyone looks clean. You know, what could possibly be wrong?
Yeah.
And I
And I will say, though, like, at least with CPS and welfare checks, they try, but there's no forcing of it. Like, they do talk to the children, and if give the children an opportunity to, like, lead into some kind of or disclose some kind of neglect or abuse. And if nothing is said or any indication, unfortunately, there's just nothing that police or CBS could do. Like,
mhm.
regardless of how many claims there are, there's nothing they can do. And that's that double-edged sword is you don't want someone to be able to just call claim abuse and then have someone's kids taken away if that's not true. But then on the
For
other
sure.
hand is like looking back, we know that there was abuse, and it's too bad that there were so many opportunities that just they couldn't do anything.
I feel like this happens a lot with internet crimes also, or even when the evidence is all just online. It's kind of hard to make it real world and kind of make that transition. I feel like you see that a lot with online harassment and bullying and stalking. At what point does this become something that you can be held accountable for in the real world? Like if she's just being kind of awful to her kids online, is that really illegal? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, is even leaving them alone, is that illegal? It's kind of a fine line. It depends on how long, it depends on how old they are, it depends on what kind of provisions are left for them, but there's a nuance to it. It's not just there are not videos of her beating the children with a belt or something that someone could say this is significant physical abuse. It's a lot of mental stuff, which is also always harder to
Yeah.
prove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
and like, it's one of those, as she became more and more popular, she started making more and more connections.
mm-hmm.
And she made,
Good choice of words.
yeah. And so she started making, there were multiple YouTube channels with her. Then she started getting involved in connections with Jody Hillebrand.
Mm-hmm.
And they started their own kind of video series, I guess is a good way to describe it. Just talking about like life and religion and family. And there was a very strong, like Mormon belief undertone to a lot of it when you're listening to the two of them talk and about repentance and sin and family unity. And To be totally honest, I've listened to a couple of them, and after like the third one, I kind of just glazed over because they have that very monotone voice when they talk. And if you listen to Warren Jeffs, it's that same very flat, just like at a higher pitch. They just like don't have a ton of like up and down during these videos, and it's
Yeah.
very easy to like. There's like people say that that tone is very easy to convince people with stuff. That's why they use that tone. Is it's that drawing you in, and then it like goes into your subconscious rather than if they're crazy and loud, you're like paying more attention and not actually listening to what they're saying. It was mind numbing.
I totally agree. I definitely feel like this gave me Warren Jeffs vibes. Also, a lot of Lori Vallow things going off in my brain. It really reminded. They're not doomsday preppers, but just the way that I feel like Jody, who we do need to talk about briefly, because she's a big part of this case. Jody Hildebrandt is a therapist who meets Ruby Franke around the time that she is ending her first YouTube channel in like 2020. And she becomes Ruby and Kevin's marriage therapist. And it progresses to the point where Jody moves into their home. Jody is living with them from 2021 to 2022. And Kevin and Ruby were sleeping in separate bedrooms during this time. And I guess there was a large number of couples that she did sessions for privately and in group counseling where the husband and wife were told, I guess, to sleep in separate bedrooms. She had a very high divorce rate for her marriage couples counseling also. And she was very concerned about men who looked at porn, which I think is definitely a common issue and something the Mormon Church is very opposed to. And the marriage is not getting better in therapy, and Kevin eventually moves out and they are separated, and he leaves Ruby in full control of the kids. The 4 kids that are still at home anyway. So that brings us up to when they start their channel. And it's kind of unclear to me where Ruby and the kids were living this whole time, because it seems like they were kind of back and forth between Jody's house and her house, that the kids sometimes lived in both houses and that Ruby sometimes lived in both houses.
That's what I heard too.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like they were definitely weird and they're very preachy and they acted like they had everything figured out. And their videos were, I agree, mind-numbing and culty. But I think this pretty much brings us up to August 2023.
Yeah, and I think, so their channel was called Moms of Truth. And one thing that they said in their, well, Ruby said specifically in one of the videos, was she addressed that she had stepped back from her channel to do this channel because she wanted to, quote, save her kids from people hurting them, excuse me. And I think that's gonna come full circle later. But again, she always, again, the preachiness of she wanted to save her children from these external forces and not having their mom stand up for them and be firm about her disciplinary and where she stands on things. And like you said, that brings us to August of 23. They were at Jody's house, the 2 women and her 2 children, the 2 youngest children. The 2 middle children were staying with a friend who also worked at Connections. That's how they met. And a couple hundred miles away.
Exactly. So her 2 oldest children have moved out. They're adults. The 2 middle children, who are teenage girls, were actually living at Ruby's house by themselves. And Ruby was staying at Jody's house most of the time with the 2 youngest children, which was hundreds of miles away. So the youngest,
Yeah,
the middle girls,
250.
the middle girls were mostly living at the Franke home alone. But on the day of August 30th, 2023, they were picked up by Pam, who was the third person involved with Connections, which was Jody's YouTube channel company that Ruby joined. And then they ultimately started their Instagram, which was Moms of Truth, where they did their parenting classes. So that's how Jody and Ruby and Pam all go together. But I think we should talk about um, her youngest son, who is 12, Russell. He was he was knocking on doors and ringing doorbells in Jody's neighborhood until someone answered. An older man answered his door, and Russell asked for two favors. He said he needed to go to a police station and he needed something to eat. And the guy is looking at him and he is emaciated. He has duct tape on his legs and he has several visible injuries. And this man calls the police and gives a very heartfelt, very tearful report to the 911 operator, basically saying, I think this child has been abused by his mother and by her friend Jody and being held hostage, and we need police here right now.
Yeah, and so when the police arrived, he was scared, rightfully so.
Oh, yeah.
And he had sores on his wrists and ankles. He was emotional. There was still the tape. He was just overall very malnourished and weak, and he was genuinely scared. And so then they went over to Jody's. They found the youngest daughter, Eve, who was 10, in a very similar condition of malnourishment. And simultaneously, the police were showing up at Ruby's home and looking for the other two kids, because now they have two very neglected children and two kids no one knew where they were. And
Right.
then they eventually found them at Pam's, and they were fine, but definitely just left there. Like, so
Yeah,
fine
although
being a relative term.
I do want to say something about Pam, though, she was briefly handcuffed and held in a police car, but she was not arrested, and charges have not been pressed against her. So I don't want to malign her or whatever, but she said that she was told that there was a family emergency and then she needed to pick up the kids and bring them to her house. So she did that, and she said, I needed help with cleaning. So I had them scrub the floors and clean the kitchen, and it just seemed like you brought them over to do labor and not because there was some sort of family emergency. She's like, I have company coming over, so I had the kids clean. What?
Yeah,
I don't know. I just thought that was very odd.
too. Like,
I don't know. They think these kids are their slaves and that they work for them. It's bizarre to me.
It's that tasks and building character or whatever the idea is.
Yeah.
There's I'm drawing a huge blank. How to Raise Your Child conditioning book.
Raise Up a Child.
Thank you. We'll have to talk about that, but it gives a lot of those same mentalities of your child should be expected to be able to do all these things, and if they don't, there's serious consequences. There's a lot of parallels to that parenting style with the Franke family, for sure.
Yeah, because, in my opinion, these cults that I would say Ruby was in, that the Duggars are in, whatever, they need to break their members down, and they need to break their members' children down and have them become extremely, extremely blindly obedient. That's what they're trying to teach. They're not trying to teach any kind of logic or reason or thinking for yourself or any kind of autonomy, independence. It's more of, you need to serve us, you need to serve God, you need to always, always, always be on your best behavior. Anything that you do that's bad will send you to hell. There's huge, huge consequences for any little mistake that you make. And to me...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, seems like a very nasty way to raise kids to me, but...
Yeah, I'm just gonna like you mentioned there's gonna be things that come out in the future, and I completely agree, but it'll be curious if they have a Mormon version of that book because that one is
Hmm.
very like Christian denominational like swayed. I'll be curious if like it comes out that if they use that same book or if there's like a Mormon parallel for that same kind of disciplinary and raising your kids. I'll be very curious.
I think it's all probably very similar in the way that they're all using the same book in general. Like they're
Yeah.
all using the Bible. Like the Mormons are using an extra book as well, but a lot of this stuff is just weird interpretations of the Bible and how it says to raise your kids, and it's being just sold to people in different ways, which I think is exactly what Jody and Ruby were trying to do. Was again turn a profit on teaching ways to abuse your kids into compliance.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
because
I think it happened way more than people want to either accept or, and also Frankie wanted them to know. Because
hmm
at the day of the arrest, the eldest daughter, Sherry, who had been making all these phone calls previously, posted an Instagram picture of the police at the residence with the caption, finally. And then she posted
yeah,
another story saying, quote, today has been a big day. Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS for years about this, and so glad they finally decided to step up. End quote. Like that to me also says, okay, how many other attempts did this poor girl make and her siblings and her like anybody else that just simply were
yeah.
ignored or went uninvestigated?
Right. And what was done to her that didn't even make it on any of these videos? Because I don't think any of this, I mean, I think that when Ruby met Jody, it really escalated, but I think that
Mm-hmm.
there was already a baseline of this type
Yeah,
of abuse and toxicity in their home. And Jody just really kind of like Chad
intensify.
Daybell did for Lori Vallow, where she just kind of hyped her up on everything that she already wanted to do. Because I think
Yeah,
that she
it
was
just
getting a thrill from it
exponential.
already. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary to have someone validate all of the terrible shit you do.
Or even like there is that possibility that she didn't necessarily get a thrill out of it, but generally thought that there was good, like this is how you discipline, like maybe that's how she was disciplined, and this is how you discipline your children. And
It's
then
possible.
Jody saw the opportunity to take her opinions and just slowly feed it to Ruby and exponentially make it more and more and more to a point she
Hmm.
didn't even realize the progression was happening until it was too late.
I mean, that's possible. And Jody definitely has a history of doing this. It's not new since she met Ruby. I think Jody would have gone on to abuse, physically, mentally torture children with or without Ruby. I don't know if Ruby would have gotten to this level without Jody.
Right.
So, and I'd also be
Well,
very interested to hear from Jody's kids because I don't know if she did. I mean, she did have children, but they're older, and I don't know what they went
yeah.
through.
Well,
But
Jody's
one of her
niece,
nieces has come forward.
I was gonna say
Yeah,
Jody's niece
Jesse.
stepped up and said something, and totally believes
Yeah.
everything that was accused because she went through some similar punishments, being duct taped and made to sleep outside in the snow in Utah and isolated. Like to, from her stories, she's like, this 100% is possible, and she totally knows what she's doing. Like you gotta
Yeah.
wonder what her
I mean, I
motives
think
went
that
in.
it's a pattern. And there's also several men that have come forward from Jody's counseling that basically said that she turned my wife against me. She turned my community against me. She told our church that I'm a pedophile because I look at porn sometimes. And I'm sure that there were people that she did therapy for that told her horrible things, but a therapist is not allowed to tell other people about that. And there are documented times where Jody was disciplined for breaking her patient confidentiality. And she had a pattern of using and abusing and manipulating everybody that was a dependent of her and anybody that was vulnerable. I think she's a monster, really.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think Ruby would have just been a regular abusive asshole otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it ever would have gotten this bad without her. But I definitely think there was already abuse happening. Um, and
Yeah.
I think it also couples with that Mormon culture of kind of telling on other people. Because like you said,
Mm-hmm.
Jodi had a history of breaking confidentiality. And back in 2012, her license was put on probation because she took patient information to the Mormon church leaders at, I think it was BYU, basically telling on a kid about something that was discussed during therapy. And Kevin hadn't spoken to his wife in a year by the time they got arrested. And
Yeah.
basically, Ruby was, like you said, turned against him. She told him not to contact her, that they needed to live separately. He needed to not contact the child. Like, he basically needed to disappear. And that was the only way they could be saved.
I do have some questions about Kevin because he does not have custody of the kids now. Still,
Mm-hmm.
he hasn't been charged, but he has not gotten the kids back. And I don't know if maybe he should have been charged, because I do think that he had a absolute responsibility to be checking on them and to know what the conditions that they were being kept in was. But I think that he definitely was genuinely shocked at the level of the torture that the kids endured, which I feel like we should talk about what kind of abuse they've admitted to and
Mm-hmm.
stuff because Ruby very thoughtfully provided a journal for all of us to look at later. She was a very dedicated Mormon, and so she documented all of her crimes, and so we were able to review those. And there's all kinds of things that I'm assuming Kevin did not know about. Like, she held her son's head underwater and held his nose and mouth. She would make her daughter jump on a cactus over and over again. She forced her daughter to run and stand in the rain for 2 hours. She made the kids sleep outside. She made the kids sleep on the floor. She withheld food, which was such a major theme for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such an abuse of her power. And there was reports that she would put, I think it was chili powder on the kids' wounds under the duct tape, just so that it would hurt even more.
Yeah. So these are all the
It's
crimes that they were accused of from over the summer of 2023. So May to August. Because
yeah.
there's a 3-month period that Russell and Eve basically were alone with Ruby and Jodi, and all of those things started happening. And her and Jodi together were doing both of everything. Like, in all of the plea agreements that were posted, both of them had full behavior on this, which is insane. And I agree. I don't think he knew. I think he might have known like the little things, like when they were living as a family. But I think when she went off the deep end, when it was just her and Jodi, I don't think he had any clue it was ever that bad. I don't think he ever expected it would get that bad either.
He did seem genuinely surprised, and he did file for divorce right after this.
Mm-hmm.
And he has tried to get custody of the kids, but I wonder why he hasn't been allowed to.
Well, there might be like an investigation into him currently because rightfully so, like you have all this stuff happening in the family, and now I'm sure other things have come out with the older kids as they were younger. And he would
Maybe.
have to now show, like, hey, like, here was my involvement, here's how I'm going to change. He might be ordered to take parenting classes before he can get them. Because there's nothing that I was able to find that barred him from having his children. I think the court's just looking at it like you need to prove that you can have them safely, considering all of the stuff that these kids have now gone through.
I feel so terrible for these kids.
Yeah. So September 1st, of 23 was when the two of them were arrested for 6 counts of aggravated child abuse in the second degree, which is a felony in Utah. Each count holds 1 to 15-year prison sentences. They were held without bail, and basically from day one, Ruby's a team started working on a plea agreement with the prosecutors about what they were going to do in order to, well, help her as much as they could, considering the facts.
Right. Exactly. I thought it was interesting that they both got the same amount of time.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's pleas, but I wonder if they'll end up serving the same amount of time.
Yeah, so both of them got the same plea agreement. They pled guilty to 4 counts. The other 2 counts were dropped, which again serves the 1 to 15 years. And they were found to have to serve that consecutively. So they will be in there for a minimum of 4 years before they can go up to the parole board. And what I think for Utah specifically is interesting is the courts don't determine when you get out, the parole board does. So after those 4 years, they go up to this board, plead their case, and then the parole board, depending on how they've been in prison or what their case was, will make the determination on how long you get to stay. So they could stay anywhere from 4 years to 60 years behind bars, assuming they have absolute perfect behavior, never get in any issues, and then time gets added, which would be shocking to me with these charges if they're not going to get one internal issue that and more time gets added.
That's definitely possible. I do think that they will be model inmates, though. And Jody will probably start a small cult, a prison cult, and then Ruby, I don't know. I think that she's beaten down at this point, and she seems remorseful, I feel like, but I don't know how genuine it is. I didn't feel like Jody was very genuine.
Jody, I think Jody feels bad for Jody.
Yeah.
I don't think she feels bad. I think Ruby did. So during the plea agreement, which I have a couple quotes because I want your opinion on them.
Sure.
But when they made this agreement, her team made a statement where Ruby basically blamed Jody for everything, and that Jody took advantage of her, isolated her from everybody, and then convinced her these behaviors were okay, and they were out of love and to save her children. And I think Ruby she generally wanted to be a good mom. For some reason, I feel that way for her. And I think her motivation for the plea agreement was to keep her kids from having to testify. Because that's a traumatizing thing to do to a little kid. And for some reason, something in me just feels like Ruby was like, you know what? I think these kids have done enough. Like, I'll make this agreement. I'll testify against Jody. Just don't put my kids on the stand.
I do think it's better for everyone that she pled guilty, but I also think there was a lot of evidence, and she would have probably got more time than 4 years if she did not plead guilty. So I think that it shows a level of responsibility to plead guilty, but it's also, she is guilty. And she was gonna do time for this.
Oh yeah. And she only got out of two cases, which would have added 2-year minimum. And she's going to be a convicted felon when she gets out, if she gets out. But during her sentencing, her quote was, "With the deepest regret and sorry for my family, I do plead guilty," when they asked her about the last charge. But, I don't know.
I mean,
so
she should be remorseful and guilty,
right?
but
you should.
I hope that she has seen the error of her ways, and I think that maybe it's good that she blames Jody, and maybe if she can just separate from Jody and she can get some, I don't know, some clarity in prison, maybe she can get some other experiences and meet other people, and she will be not in her little bubble because prison's going to force you to be social in a sense. And maybe the time away from her kids and away from her very comfortable life where she had all of the control, maybe that'll be humbling for her. Maybe she'll come back and have a new appreciation for her kids. Maybe they'll be able to rebuild a relationship because I'm sure the kids still love her. That's their mother. And it would be better for everyone if she could really repent and improve her life and not act like this anymore. I think that'd be healing for everybody. Jody, though, I think is beyond repair. I don't think that's going to get better.
I
think she's going to get out and she is going to just be a different kind of cult leader.
Yeah. So let's talk about the charges. So charge 5 and 6 were related to Eve, who, let's keep in mind, was 9 at the time. And so charge 5, all of these were aggravated child abuse, but they were kind of subcategorized. So 5 was specifically for the emotional harm towards Eve, the isolation, the denial of food and water. Eve was convinced that she was evil and possessed, and these actions were being done to help her. And they had said this so many times to her that when the police came in and she was taken out, she was actually also convinced she was evil and deserved what was happening to her, which is so sad. This sweet little girl, if anyone looks at pictures, she's this cute little thing, and she's now sitting, no, I'm evil and I deserve this.
With her head shaved. So messed up.
Right, and keeping with that exact thought of mind, now we have the 6th charge, which is the physical abuse towards Eve, which included standing outside for hours at a time, doing manual labor. Now, head shaved, she's barefoot, she was forced to run in the rain, run down the dirt roads, she had scabs and blisters, and the poor thing was just destroyed at that. Like, she didn't have as much physical abuse as Russell, which we're going to get into in a second, but from a 9-year-old having to do manual labor outside in the summer heat for hours at a time, I think that's totally justified of a charge.
I think so too.
So then we have count 3, which she pled guilty on, which is the emotional harm for Russell. Again, that isolation, being told he was evil and possessed, that he had to repent, and what was happening was acts of love. I didn't find anywhere that Russell necessarily believed what was happening was that because he was evil. It very well could be true, but the distinct I noticed was Eve. It was noticed that she believed it and Russell was just told it.
Well, maybe that's because Russell made so many attempted escapes and ultimately did escape and was begging for help, whereas Eve was terrified to go to the police when they came. It took hours to even get her into an ambulance. She was cowering and wouldn't speak and was so scared. So I think that, and the whole time she was just asking, oh, is Jody going to be mad that you're here? Is Jody going to be okay that you came in? I think that she had a level of believing that she was really the spawn of Satan and she was evil and she was possessed and she was so disobedient that she really deserved all of the things that were happening to her, whereas Russell knew he was getting a raw deal and was trying to escape. But I think some of that's just their age difference and their level of understanding.
Yeah. But Russell, so count 1 was the physical abuse that was against Russell. And reading through her plea agreement, it just breaks my heart. And you touched on a couple of these things, and I'm going to jump around a little bit in this quote. But starting kind of with him, you have him doing a lot of physical activity, wall sits, manual labor outside without shoes, standing in direct sunlight for days, being restricted on his food and his water, and when he was given anything, it was very minimal malnourishment, plain food. But as he became defiant is when they started to get a little bit more aggressive. So he had made a previous attempt to run away in July, at which time they started binding him. So the bindings, and this is the quote in her agreement, bindings included being tied to the defendant or to weights. Many times the bindings included 2 sets of handcuffs, one to RF's wrists and the others to his ankles. At times, RF was lying on his stomach. Ropes were used on the 2 sets of handcuffs together so that the arms and lower legs were lifted off of the ground. The bindings resulted in injuries to RF's wrists and ankles, where the handcuffs cut through his skin and damaged tissues and muscles. These injuries were then treated with homeopathic remedies and covered in duct tape. The bindings were then placed over the duct tape and continued.
Ugh.
And that is just one tiny piece of her admittance on what she did to this poor little boy, simply because he tried to save himself.
The things that these kids are punished for are so like outrageous. Like he really didn't do anything to deserve that in the first. He didn't deserve any of the treatment he was getting, and then to try to escape and be brought home and treated like that is, it's just wild to me that they were able to wrap their heads around what they were doing to him and still justify it to themselves that this is like an appropriate way to handle a child running away. It's like, oh, well, we'll just tie him down.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if you look up this position, this is like a very similar position that people use in like, with like terrorists on like these third world countries of like really intense prisons of like grown men, and like it's torture and no other word. They were torturing this little boy simply for existing because he was evil in their minds and that he had to repent, and he didn't even know what he was repenting for. How do you apologize for something you don't even know what you did?
I mean, how bad could it even be? He's 12. He's a child. He's also being kept from society. He's been pulled out of school. He's being kept away from his siblings. Who is he interacting with that he's even causing any problems?
Yeah. And it's sad that those kind of things happened that were so extreme. So then you keep reading through it and you have things like, quote, she kicked RF while wearing boots, holding his head underwater, cutting off oxygen by placing her hands over his mouth and nose. And you read that, and now you're looking at that one seems not as bad as these other things. But then when you take a step back, those are also horrible, horrible things that I can only imagine Jody would use with, this isn't as bad. Us tying him up, that's the punishment. You kicking him with boots, that's just enforcement. That's fine. That's not as bad. Like, I could see the levels of, or, oh, it's just a wall sit. It's building character. Like, I could see how she could manipulate the situation and convince Ruby, oh, well, this isn't as bad. It's fine. Just do it.
Ugh. Yeah. I think that the more that they abuse the kids, the easier it got, especially to justify it. And I think with Jody hyping her up, it just made it seem like these are the things, this is what she needed to do to save her kids from their demonic possessions. And if that's your goal, it's kind of hard to argue with any way you have to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like they maybe should have been charged with attempted murder.
It would be interesting. And like, unfortunately, that the reason they have all these, originally it was 6 charges of aggravated child abuse, is because it was just towing that line. Like, they did things to torture and torment these poor kids, but they never crossed into that like world of other charges. And this is where thankfully the law is so open for interpretation that they can do multiple charges of the same thing, but having the motivations be different. So you have one for emotional, you have one for physical, you have one for that. Like, thankfully, it's not like, if the following happened, this is the charge. And if it's not this specific list, they're free. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm glad that we have that interpretation ability.
Yeah. I feel like it's a gray area of what they did, but it could have resulted in either or both of the kids dying. I wouldn't have been shocked
100%.
if like you gave it a couple months, especially.
Oh, I could only like a couple more months, 100%. Or if you think about like if this had gone on during the winter with hypothermia and
Mm.
things like that, like it could have been worse, which is a horrible thing to say. But
I mean, he could have gotten killed during his escape. Also, he could have gotten hit by a car, abducted. Like they weren't watching him. They weren't providing him a safe environment. And when you're leaving kids alone for days and hours, too, anything could happen. And I wonder what they would have done if they came home and one or both of the kids was dead.
yeah, they'd probably try to hide it.
They probably would have just ditched them and hoped nobody would have noticed. Because they were already trying to hide the kids from the world. I think that they knew that their shaved heads and their ligament wounds and their injuries from being tied up, I think it would have been obvious if they had been sent to school or their father had seen them. So they had to
Yeah.
keep them hidden. I don't think they would have brought them to the hospital if they needed medical attention. They did need medical attention, and weren't bringing them to the hospital. These wounds could have got infected. I feel like they were constantly putting their lives in danger.
Yeah, it's sad to say that these kids are lucky because nobody deserves this. But they're very lucky
Yeah.
to be alive and lucky to be out of the situation. And
I hope they're okay now.
these kids are gonna need so much therapy. It's not even funny. But my hope, personally, I think I would love to see these kids, and this is asking a lot of the older siblings, but like I hope that dad actually wasn't involved, and if that is the case, he is positively in their life. But I kind of want them to go to Sherry. I want her to take these little kids and like, because clearly she's been trying to protect them from day one, and I would love for her to be able to like take the two little ones or the two middle ones, like give these kids like a positive, loving environment versus having them to try to figure out all on their own.
Yeah. I think that it'll be good to have each other for this kind of circumstance, and I hope the kids are able to support each other. I mean, there's nobody that can validate better for what kind of parenting that they had and the experiences that they had in their childhoods. I mean, it's a unique circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I hope their dad is not as awful as the other adults in their lives. And
It seems like dad just got.
I think that there's plenty of time for these kids to go on to have like a wonderful, productive life and be happy and be safe and be free. They're still kids, but it's just, this is like a huge dark cloud over their lives. And it's going to take a long time.
I know, the poor babies. And on that super depressing note, do you have any final thoughts on the Franke family or Jody and Ruby in general?
No. I mean, it's just making me really think about all of the other cults and parenting decisions and other episodes we could do about that. But otherwise, I don't think I really have final thoughts. How about you?
I think it's just with this case and these two women, that it's very interesting how there's little pieces of so many other individuals or groups that kind of are woven into this one, that
Mm.
we either have already talked about or we're going to talk about in the future. And it kind of shows that nothing is as it seems on the outside. Just because your favorite mommy blogger has this perfect life doesn't mean you should idolize them, because you never know what's actually happening.
I mean, you really just don't know what people have going on. And it's easy to look at anybody from the outside and just think that their lives are perfect and enviable, but it's just really rarely the case.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that was Miss Ruby
Well, it was
Franke,
great talking to you, and we'll
and
catch
it
up
was
soon
good
for
to
our next
talk to
mother.
you.